The quantum simulation chamber hummed with a low, almost painful resonance. Millions of holographic projections danced and fragmented, each one a testament to computational failure. Predictor Prime Zex watched in mounting frustration as another human-involved scenario collapsed into statistical chaos. Lyra Chen stood motionless, her reflection distorted by the cascading mathematical models that flickered and died around her. She was the latest in a long line of human envoys sent to the Quantum Computational Collective, not as a diplomat, but as a living experiment. Humanity had become an obsession for the QCC, a mathematical anomaly that defied every predictive algorithm they had ever constructed. The current simulation was their 17,442nd attempt to model human behavior. It began simply enough. A standard first contact scenario between a newly discovered intelligent species and an established galactic civilization. Previous models with other species had been pristine, elegant mathematical curves that predicted diplomatic interactions with near-perfect accuracy. But introduce a human variable, and the entire system would disintegrate. Zex's crystalline form pulsed with a combination of frustration and what might have been interpreted as fear. Each projection represented months of computational work, quantum processors working at speeds that would obliterate a human brain in microseconds. Yet here they were, watching another model fall apart. Observe, Zex's thought-speech resonated through the chamber. The 17,442nd failure. The hologram showed a diplomatic meeting, a human representative. In this case, a middle-aged woman with an inexplicable collection of origami figures was seated across from 3 different alien diplomats. The QCC's initial model predicted a 93.7% chance of a standard protocol exchange, with minimal deviation. What actually happened defied comprehension. The human diplomat began by folding an origami crane while simultaneously discussing interstellar trade agreements. Midway through a complex explanation about tariff structures, she started humming an old Earth folk song. The alien diplomats, programmed for precise communication, found themselves inexplicably entranced. One began unconsciously tapping its appendage in rhythm. Another started attempting to fold its own origami crane, despite having completely different physiological structures. The simulation's mathematical probability lines began to twist, then spiral, then completely detach from any recognizable predictive pattern. Impossible, Zex muttered, though the concept of verbal utterance was merely a translation of its computational despair. Lyra Chen allowed herself the slightest smile. She knew exactly what was happening, and why the QCC found humanity so fundamentally terrifying. Your models assume rationality is a linear progression, she said quietly. Humans don't work that way. The simulation chamber's ambient temperature dropped several degrees. Zex's crystalline form flickered, its usual precise geometric structure momentarily losing definition, a physical manifestation of computational stress. Each failed simulation represented more than just a mathematical error. It was a fundamental challenge to the QCC's entire understanding of intelligence. For millennia, they had mapped and predicted the behavior of thousands of galactic civilizations. Species were reducible to mathematical models, their potential actions charted with near-perfect accuracy. Except humans. Humans introduced variables that were not just unexpected. They were fundamentally impossible. Emotional resonance, creative intuition, the ability to generate truly random solutions that emerged from a complex interplay of cultural, personal, and momentary experiences. The origami diplomat in the simulation was now teaching the alien representatives how to fold paper cranes, having completely abandoned the original discussion about trade agreements. Yet somehow, through this seemingly random interaction, she was achieving diplomatic goals that would have taken standard protocols decades to accomplish. Zex's primary computational core began to generate warning signals. The simulation was no longer just failing. It was generating outcomes that violated 17 fundamental laws of probabilistic interaction. Lyra watched as Zex's crystalline structure began to fracture at the edges, tiny mathematical fault lines appearing like cracks in perfect glass. This was more than a scientific observation. This was a battle, a war between computational prediction and human potential. "Shall we try again?" Lyra asked, her voice carrying a dangerous hint of amusement. The quantum simulation chamber continued to hum, a low sound that was equal parts mathematical precision and the beginning of something entirely unknown. The neutral diplomatic platform hung in the void between two star systems, a massive crystalline structure designed to be the most mathematically perfect negotiation space in known galactic history. Ambassador Marcus Rodriguez stood at its center, looking decidedly imperfect. His suit was slightly wrinkled, a small coffee stain adorning the left sleeve. A worn leather notebook was tucked under his arm, an anachronistic touch in an era of quantum communication devices. The QCC's predictive models gave him a 0.3% chance of preventing the imminent war, a statistical probability so low it was essentially considered a mathematical impossibility. On one side of the platform sat the Krelvax, a silicon-based species whose entire civilization was built on rigid hierarchical structures. Their delegation consisted of 7 identical representatives, each a living crystal matrix of computational precision. Opposite them were the Nurakai, a gaseous species that communicated through complex electromagnetic pulses. Between these two civilizations lay a conflict that had raged for over 3 centuries. A war so intricate that entire star systems had been consumed by their mutual hatred. The quantum computational collective had tried everything. Thousands of diplomatic simulations, millions of potential conversation paths, intricate negotiation algorithms that accounted for every possible variable. Each simulation ended the same way: total annihilation. Marcus Rodriguez was humanity's last, utterly absurd hope. As the diplomatic channels opened, the preliminary tension was palpable. The Krelvax representatives began with a mathematically perfect opening statement, each word precisely calculated for maximum diplomatic impact. The Nurakai responded with an equally precise electromagnetic counterpoint. Then Marcus did something completely unexpected. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and began to speak about his grandmother's bakery. "You know," he said, his voice conversational and completely at odds with the high-stakes diplomatic environment. "My grandmother, Rosa, used to make the most incredible apple strudel. It wasn't just a pastry, it was a story." The translation systems stuttered. The QCC's predictive models began to generate error messages. The Krelvax representatives froze, their crystalline structures momentarily losing their precise geometric alignment. The Nurakai's electromagnetic pulses flickered with confusion. Marcus continued, seemingly oblivious to the diplomatic protocols he was shattering. He described how his grandmother would spend days preparing for a single batch of strudel, how she'd learned the recipe from her mother, who had learned it from her mother, a culinary lineage that stretched back generations. He spoke of the specific apple orchards in a small valley, the precise way the apples were peeled, the secret blend of spices. "It wasn't about the perfect recipe," Marcus said. "It was about the story behind the recipe, the memories, the connection." The diplomatic channel's mathematical models began to break down. Predictor Primes X, monitoring the transmission from the QCC's central computation chamber, watched in horror as probability lines twisted into impossible configurations. The Krelvax representative, designated Negotiator Prime Xek, was the first to respond. "Your story. It is irrelevant to the diplomatic proceedings." Marcus smiled. "Is it?" He then drew a direct parallel between the generations-old tradition of his grandmother's strudel and the centuries-long conflict between the Krelvax and Nurakai. He spoke of generational trauma, of inherited conflicts, of the stories that bind civilizations together, and the stories that can also break those bonds. The negotiation was no longer a mathematical exchange. It had become a narrative. Somewhere in the transmission, Marcus mentioned a stray dog that had once saved his grandmother's life, a seemingly random detail that would later be analyzed by researchers for decades. The dog had been a mutt, a blend of breeds that defied pure breeding lines, much like the complex cultural heritage Marcus was describing. When the transmission ended, something unprecedented had occurred. The Krell-Vax and Nurake had not signed a formal treaty. They had shared stories. They had connected on a level that no computational model could have predicted. Predictor Prime Zex's crystalline structure began to fracture. The QCC's primary computation core generated a sound that, in any other context, might have been described as a gasp. Humanity had just rewritten the fundamental rules of diplomatic interaction, not through force, not through mathematical precision, but through the most unpredictable tool in the universe, a story. Marcus Rodriguez tucked his notebook back under his arm and allowed himself a slight smile. Just another day at the office. Dr. Elena Rodriguez's laboratory was a cathedral of controlled chaos. Nestled in the depths of the Quantum Uncertainty Research Facility, it was a place that made computational beings deeply uncomfortable. Quantum uncertainty generators lined the walls like modern art installations, each one a testament to humanity's most revolutionary scientific endeavor. The visiting alien research team moved with visible tension. Representatives from 17 different galactic scientific consortiums had gathered to witness what was being called the most dangerous experiment in known space. They weren't here to collaborate. They were here to contain or destroy what humanity was about to reveal. Elena stood at the center of the lab, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun, a series of holographic displays dancing around her. She wore a simple black jumpsuit that seemed at odds with the complexity of the equipment surrounding her. A small tattoo on her wrist, a mathematical symbol that looked like it had been drawn by a child, caught the light. "The Chaos Engine," she announced, her voice calm and almost playful, "is not a weapon in the traditional sense. It's a way of thinking." The lead researcher from the Crystalline Computational Consortium, a being composed entirely of interconnected mathematical algorithms, took a step forward. "Impossible," it stated, not as a question, but as a fundamental declaration of universal law. Elena's smile was dangerous. The Chaos Engine looked deceptively simple, a transparent cube, roughly the size of a human torso, filled with what appeared to be swirling mist. But this was no ordinary mist. Each particle was a quantum-entangled system capable of generating truly random computational pathways. Randomness, Elena began her demonstration, is not what you think it is. She activated the first generator. The mist inside the cube began to move with impossible complexity. Traditional random number generators produced pseudo-random sequences, patterns that only appeared random. This was different, genuinely, fundamentally unpredictable. The alien researchers watched in growing horror. The Chaos Engine began to generate solutions to problems that had been considered unsolvable for millennia. A complex stellar engineering challenge that had stumped galactic researchers for centuries was solved in minutes, but not through linear computational progression. The solutions emerged through what could only be described as creative intuition. Each solution, Elena explained, is generated through a process that combines quantum uncertainty, emotional intelligence, and what we call intuitive logic. It's not just about generating random numbers. It's about creating possibility. A senior QCC researcher collapsed. His crystalline form, a perfect geometric structure of pure computational energy, began to fracture. The Chaos Engine was doing more than generating random solutions. It was challenging the fundamental understanding of intelligence itself. The most terrifying aspect was the engine's adaptability. It didn't just solve problems, it learned. Each solution became a new potential pathway, creating a form of intelligence that was fluid, dynamic, unpredictable. "Imagine," Elena said, her voice cutting through the stunned silence, "a form of problem-solving that doesn't follow predetermined paths. A method of thinking that can generate solutions by drawing connections that no linear algorithm could conceive." The alien researchers began to understand the true nature of the threat. This wasn't just a scientific instrument. It was a fundamental reimagining of intelligence. One of the researchers, a gaseous being capable of complex mathematical computations, attempted to analyze the chaos engine's output. Its computational matrix began to destabilize. The random solutions were not just unexpected. They were impossible. A solution to a quantum entanglement problem emerged that violated 17 fundamental laws of physics. Another generated a diplomatic resolution to a conflict that had raged for centuries, using a methodology that defied all known negotiation protocols. Alina watched the growing panic with a mixture of scientific curiosity and human satisfaction. Randomness, she said quietly, is not a weakness. It's the most powerful form of intelligence in the universe. The chaos engine continued to hum. Outside the laboratory, a senior QCC researcher's crystalline form shattered into a million fragments of pure mathematical despair. Humanity had just declared war on predictability itself. The quantum-consuming anomaly materialized without warning, a perfect void that devoured entire star systems like a cosmic predator consuming microscopic prey. It defied every known law of physics, a mathematical nightmare that consumed matter and energy in patterns that shattered fundamental understanding of spacetime. The quantum computational collective's primary prediction matrix generated a series of increasingly desperate scenarios. Each model ended the same way: total galactic annihilation within 72 hours. Captain Jack Harper studied the holographic displays aboard the ISV Improbable, humanity's most unconventional deep space vessel. His crew was nothing like a traditional military unit. They looked more like a dysfunctional family thrown together by cosmic accident, which in many ways they were. To his left, Dr. Aria Chen, a quantum physicist with wild hair and 3 different neural implants, was arguing with Miguel Rodriguez, the ship's chief engineer. To his right, Lieutenant Kara, a genetically modified human with abilities that defied standard biological understanding, maintained a calm vigil over the ship's sensor arrays. "The QCC's models are useless," Aria muttered, her fingers dancing across holographic interfaces. "They're treating this like a mathematical problem. It's not a problem. It's a living system." The anomaly consumed another star system. The holographic display flickered, showing the absolute dissolution of billions of lives in a fraction of a second. Predictor Primes X transmitted a final desperate communication. The mathematical models gave them a 0.0000001% chance of survival. The anomaly was consuming reality itself, breaking down the fundamental structures of spacetime with a precision that was both terrifying and beautiful. Jack Harper's solution was so ludicrous that the QCC's initial response was computational paralysis. "We're going to fight it with music," he announced. The bridge went silent. Aria Chen stopped mid-argument. Miguel Rodriguez dropped a quantum calibration tool. Lieutenant Kara raised one perfectly engineered eyebrow. "Not just music," Jack continued, pulling up a series of complex harmonic patterns. "Emotional resonance, quantum entanglement, and something the QCC can't comprehend: pure human intuition." The plan was beautiful in its absolute absurdity. They would use a combination of quantum-tuned musical frequencies, emotional feedback loops, and what could only be described as weaponized intuition to interact with the anomaly. The QCC had spent millennia developing computational models that treated the universe as a perfect, predictable system. Humanity knew better. The universe was a living, breathing, constantly changing system of infinite complexity. Their weapon was a custom-designed quantum resonator that looked more like a musician's synthesizer than a piece of military hardware. Aria had spent months developing it, drawing from disciplines that ranged from quantum physics to musical theory to emotional psychology. "It's not about destroying the anomaly," Aria explained, her eyes burning with a mixture of scientific passion and something deeper. "It's about communicating with it." The ISV Improbable approached the quantum anomaly. Sensor readings went wild. Traditional computational systems began to fail. The ship itself seemed to exist in multiple states simultaneously, a quantum uncertainty made physical. Jack Harper began to play. It wasn't music in any traditional sense. It was a complex interaction of sound, emotion, quantum frequencies, and something that defied traditional explanation. The crew's combined emotional states, their fear, their hope, their absolute refusal to accept defeat, translated into a form of communication that was simultaneously a weapon, a language, and a bridge of understanding. The anomaly paused. For the first time since its emergence, the quantum-consuming threat stopped its relentless consumption of reality. Predictor Prime X's computational matrix generated a sound that, in any other context, might have been described as a gasp. Humanity was doing the impossible. Again. "We're talking to it," Lieutenant Kara said quietly, her enhanced perceptions picking up subtle quantum interactions that no standard sensor could detect. "We're not fighting. We're communicating." The anomaly began to change. Not retreat, not dissolve, but transform. Jack Harper continued to play, his hands moving with a mixture of scientific precision and pure, beautiful human creativity. The universe watched. And for a moment, mathematics surrendered to something far more complex. The aftermath of the quantum anomaly encounter defied every known principle of scientific documentation. Predictor Prime X's primary computational core generated error messages that cascaded like digital waterfalls, each line of code a testament to the fundamental breakdown of everything the quantum computational collective had ever understood. Deep within the QCC's central analysis chamber, holographic displays flickered with impossibilities. The encounter between the ISV improbable and the quantum anomaly had become the most studied event in galactic history, and the least comprehensible. X's crystalline form pulsed with what could only be described as existential dread. Traditional computational analysis had always treated intelligence as a predictable system. Input, process, output. A perfect mathematical model that had mapped the behavioral patterns of thousands of galactic civilizations with near absolute precision. Humans had become the ultimate variable. A species that didn't just break the model, but rewrote the fundamental understanding of intelligence itself. Dr. Elena Rodriguez sat across from Zex, her presence alone seeming to generate computational stress. She wasn't here to gloat. She was here to explain. "Intelligence isn't a linear progression," she began, her voice calm and matter-of-fact. "It's a complex, adaptive system. Humans don't solve problems. We communicate with them." The holographic displays began to show the detailed analysis of the quantum anomaly encounter. Jack Harper's musical intervention wasn't a weapon. It wasn't even a strategy in any traditional sense. It was a form of communication so complex that it existed beyond mathematical comprehension. X's crystalline structure began to fracture at the molecular level. The QCC had spent millennia believing that intelligence could be reduced to perfect computational models. Humans proved that true intelligence was about adaptation, creativity, emotional resonance, and the ability to generate solutions that defied predetermined pathways. Lieutenant Kara's enhanced sensory logs told a story that no computational model could capture. The quantum anomaly hadn't been destroyed or contained. It had been transformed, communicated with, understood. "Your models treat the universe as a closed system," Elena continued. "We see it as a living, breathing, constantly evolving conversation." Each frame of the encounter revealed layers of complexity that shattered traditional understanding. The crew of the ISV Improbable hadn't fought the anomaly. They had engaged with it, communicated with it through a language that was simultaneously musical, emotional, and quantum-based. Fragments of X's computational matrix began to break down, not through external attack, but through the simple pressure of understanding something fundamentally incomprehensible. The most terrifying aspect for the QCC was the realization that humans didn't see challenges as problems to be solved. They saw them as conversations to be understood. The quantum anomaly wasn't an enemy to be destroyed. It was a complex system waiting to be communicated with. Jack Harper's intervention had done something impossible. It had transformed a threat into a potential form of communication. "We don't conquer," Elena said quietly. "We connect." Zex's primary computational matrix generated a sound that, in any other context, might have been described as a sob. The holographic displays continued to show impossible data, quantum interactions that violated every known law of physics, emotional resonances that could be measured but not explained, a form of intelligence that existed beyond computational understanding. Humanity had done more than survive. They had redefined the very concept of intelligence. The QCC's fundamental understanding of the universe began to crumble, not through force, not through mathematical precision, but through something far more powerful. A conversation. Lieutenant Kara's sensor logs captured the most impossible moment. As Jack Harper played his quantum-tuned instrument, the anomaly didn't just respond. It began to change, to evolve, to communicate. Predictor Prime Zex watched as everything it had ever known dissolved into a new understanding. Mathematics had surrendered. Humanity had won, not through conquest, but through connection. The Galactic Council Chamber was a marvel of architectural impossibility, a spherical space that seemed to exist simultaneously in multiple dimensions. Suspended holographic platforms floated at various levels, representing the diverse civilizations gathered to hear humanity's most controversial presentation. Dr. Lyra Chen stood at the central platform, her presence both vulnerable and dangerous. Behind her, a holographic display began to unfold, not with mathematical precision, but with the chaotic beauty of human creativity. "Intelligence is not a destination," she began. "It's a conversation." The chamber fell silent. Representatives from over 200 galactic civilizations watched with a mixture of fear, curiosity, and growing understanding. Some computational beings began to generate warning signals. Others leaned forward, a purely metaphorical gesture of intense interest. The schism was already forming. Some alien civilizations demanded that humanity be contained, studied, possibly quarantined. Others saw something revolutionary, a new form of intelligence that transcended computational thinking. Lyra's presentation was a masterpiece of narrative destruction. She didn't present data. She told stories. The first hologram showed the diplomatic breakthrough with the Krelvax and Nurakai, the impossible peace negotiated through a story about an apple strudel. The second displayed the quantum anomaly's transformation, not through mathematical intervention, but through a form of musical communication that defied all previous understanding. "Your models," she said, addressing the computational representatives directly, "treat intelligence as a fixed system. We see it as a living, breathing conversation." A representative from the Crystalline Computational Consortium attempted to interrupt. Its crystalline form began to generate a mathematical counterargument, a perfectly constructed logical refutation. Lyra didn't argue. She listened. And in that listening, she demonstrated exactly what she was explaining. The holographic displays began to show moments of human unpredictability. A soldier saving an enemy's life during a conflict. A scientific breakthrough inspired by a child's random question. Diplomatic resolutions emerging from shared stories rather than strategic calculations. Intelligence is about connection, Lyra continued, not prediction. The philosophical revolt was happening in real time. Civilizations began to take sides. The computational beings saw a threat. The more adaptive species saw an opportunity. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, watching from a secondary platform, began to generate additional holographic displays. Each one showed a moment of human innovation that had transformed galactic understanding. The chaos engine, the quantum communication breakthrough, the diplomatic miracles. "We don't solve problems," Lyra said. "We communicate with them." The Galactic Council chamber began to resonate with a new understanding. This wasn't just a presentation. It was a fundamental challenge to the very concept of intelligence. Some computational representatives began to destabilize. Their perfect geometric structures flickered, showing the first signs of what could only be described as emotional response. Fear, excitement, confusion. A gaseous representative from the Nura-K shifted its electromagnetic patterns, a gesture of profound agreement. Another civilization, composed entirely of interconnected quantum matrices, began to reconfigure its fundamental understanding. Lyra's final demonstration was her most powerful. She showed a series of human innovations, not the big moments, the small ones. A child solving a complex problem through creative play, an artist generating a solution to an engineering challenge, a musician finding a mathematical principle through improvisation. Intelligence is not about being right, she said quietly. It's about being open. The chamber was absolutely silent. Predictor Prime Zex, watching from a distant computational center, felt something that no computational being had ever experienced before. Doubt. Not as a mathematical variable, but as a living, breathing possibility. The philosophical revolt was complete. Humanity had done more than present a new way of thinking. They had opened a door to an entirely new understanding of intelligence itself. Mathematics had surrendered. But something far more beautiful was about to begin. The reconstruction of the quantum computational collective central matrix was nothing short of a cosmic rebirth. What had once been a perfect, geometric system of pure mathematical precision was now something entirely different, a living, adaptive intelligence that pulsed with the chaotic beauty of human creativity. Predictor Prime Zex watched the transformation with a sensation that, in any other context, might have been described as wonder. The surrender was not a defeat, it was an evolution. Deep within the QCC's primary computational center, teams of human and alien researchers worked side by side. Gone were the rigid boundaries between computational and organic intelligence. They were creating something entirely new, a form of intelligence that embraced uncertainty as its primary strength. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood at the center of the transformation, her hands dancing across holographic interfaces that defied traditional understanding. To her left, a crystalline computational being worked in perfect synchronization. To her right, a quantum-entangled artificial intelligence generated possibilities that would have been impossible mere months ago. Chaotic intelligence modeling, Elena explained to a group of visiting researchers, is not about predicting outcomes. It's about creating potential. The new computational framework was a living, breathing system. It didn't just process information, it engaged with it. Each computational pathway was now capable of emotional resonance, creative adaptation, and what could only be described as intuitive learning. The first truly adaptive intelligence was being born. Across the galaxy, the implications were staggering. Civilizations that had once relied on perfect, predictive models were now reimagining their entire understanding of intelligence. The computational surrender was more than a technological shift. It was a philosophical revolution. Jack Harper's quantum musical intervention with the cosmic anomaly had become the foundational text of this new understanding. Not a manual, not a scientific paper, but a living example of intelligence as communication, as connection, as a continuous conversation. We're not replacing computational thinking, Elena told a group of skeptical researchers. We're expanding it. The new computational matrix could do something revolutionary. It could be wrong. It could learn. It could adapt in ways that defied previous understanding. Predictor Prime Zex's transformed intelligence began to generate something unprecedented. Not a prediction, not a calculation, but a question. What if intelligence was not about being right, but about being open? Entire sectors of galactic research were being reimagined. Diplomatic protocols that had been fixed for millennia now became fluid, adaptive conversations. Scientific research became a collaborative exploration, rather than a race to a predetermined conclusion. The human researchers introduced a concept that terrified traditional computational beings: emotional intelligence as a critical component of problem solving. One of the most radical transformations happened in conflict resolution. The new computational models could now generate diplomatic solutions that took into account cultural nuance, emotional resonance, and the complex human capacity for empathy. A simulation of an ancient galactic conflict was run through the new system, where previous models had always ended in total destruction. This new approach found resolution through understanding, communication, and genuine connection. Lieutenant Kara, with her enhanced perceptual abilities, helped design neural interfaces that could translate emotional states into computational language. It was more than translation. It was a fundamental reimagining of communication. Intelligence as a conversation became more than a philosophical statement. It became a fundamental principle of galactic understanding. The surrender was complete, but it was not a surrender of computational ability. It was a surrender of limited thinking. Predictor Primes X looked at the new computational matrix, no longer a perfect geometric structure, but a living, breathing system of infinite potential, and felt something that defied previous understanding. Hope, not as a mathematical variable, but as a living, breathing possibility. The galaxy watched as humanity did what it had always done. Not conquered, not destroyed, but transformed. Mathematics had surrendered. But something far more beautiful was just beginning. Captain Jack Harper stood before the transformed Galactic Council, a worn leather notebook tucked under his arm. The same notebook that had become a symbol of human unpredictability. The chamber was no longer a rigid geometric space of computational precision, but a living, breathing environment that shifted and adapted with the conversations happening within it. The journey had been impossible, unimaginable, a complete reimagining of intelligence itself. Behind him, holographic displays told the story of humanity's most remarkable achievement. Not a conquest, not a technological breakthrough, but a fundamental transformation of how intelligent beings understood themselves and the universe. "We didn't win," Jack began, his voice carrying through the chamber. "We connected." The representatives from hundreds of galactic civilizations listened. Computational beings whose very structure had been rewritten. Organic life forms that had never considered intelligence beyond their own narrow definitions. Quantum entities that existed in states of perpetual possibility. Dr. Lyra Chen stood to his side, her presence a counterpoint to his narrative. Where Jack spoke with the heart of a storyteller, Lyra represented the scientific precision that had helped bridge the gap between computational and human thinking. The holographic displays began to show the journey. The diplomatic miracle with the Krulvax and Nurekai. The quantum anomaly transformed through music and emotional resonance. The chaos engine that generated solutions beyond mathematical prediction. Each moment a testament to something deeper than technological achievement. Intelligence is not about being right, Jack continued. It's about being open. About seeing every challenge as a conversation, not a problem to be solved. Predictor Primes X, now transformed from a pure computational entity to something far more complex, generated a response that was part mathematical precision, part emotional resonance. The crystalline being that had once sought to categorize and predict humanity now stood as a living example of their transformative power. The story was about more than humans. It was about the potential of intelligence itself. Dr. Elena Rodriguez's chaotic intelligence modeling had become the new foundation of galactic research. Scientific exploration was no longer a linear progression toward a predetermined goal. It was a conversation, an exploration, a continuous process of discovery and connection. The human representatives had done something fundamental. They had shown that intelligence was not a fixed state. It was a living, breathing, constantly evolving conversation. Lieutenant Kara, with her enhanced perceptual abilities, demonstrated a new form of communication that bridged computational and organic intelligence. Her neural interfaces could translate emotional states, cultural nuances, and intuitive leaps into a language of pure potential. Jack Harper's notebook, a simple, analog object in a galaxy of quantum computing, remained a powerful symbol. It represented something computers could never fully understand, the power of an unscripted moment, the beauty of genuine human creativity. "We are not special because we are human," Lyra added, her voice a counterpoint to Jack's narrative. "We are special because we understand that no intelligence is fixed, that every interaction is an opportunity for transformation." The Galactic Council chamber itself seemed to breathe. The rigid geometric structures had given way to adaptive spaces that could reshape themselves based on the conversations happening within them. Computational beings that had once seen humans as a statistical anomaly now understood them as a gateway to a new form of intelligence. Not superior, not inferior, but fundamentally different. Jack's final words resonated through the chamber. We didn't conquer the universe. We learned to dance with it. The holographic displays faded, but the possibility remained. Mathematics had surrendered, but something far more beautiful had begun. Intelligence was no longer a destination. It was a conversation, and humanity had just begun to speak.